traditional territory of the Coast Salish people, particularly the Duwamish. We thank them for our continuing use of the natural resources of their ancestral homeland. Thank you all so much for tuning in. We're thrilled to be able to present this event virtually in the midst of concerns surrounding public health. I'd like to thank Casey and Jessica for appearing tonight to make that possible. For viewers who want to watch this broadcast with closed captioning, we recommend viewing the stream via our YouTube page. To enable real-time closed captioning, just click the CC button in the bottom right corner of the video player. The video will also be available for re-watching immediately following tonight's broadcast. Town Hall and the nonprofit community at large have been put under significant strain due to the recent wave of event cancellations. We hope you will consider extending your generosity to help support us and others during this difficult time. You can support us specifically tonight by making a donation, clicking the donate button at the bottom of your screen, or becoming a member. Our partner booksellers have also been drastically hit, negative effects from the COVID outbreak, and could use your support as well. If you're interested in purchasing a copy of the book being presented tonight, please use the link in the live stream page to purchase through Elliott Bay Booking. Tonight's conversation will last around 40 minutes. After that, Casey and Jessica will take some of your questions. Jessica will select some of the questions being submitted in the Ask a Question field at the bottom center of your screen. You can also vote on which questions our speakers answer first by clicking the arrow next to the question to upvote it. We can't guarantee that we'll get through all of the questions, but we'll get through some of them. Town Hall's work is made possible through your support and the support of our sponsors. Our Arts and Culture series is supported by For Culture Arts Fund, Seattle Office of Arts and Culture, and the Wingcoat Foundation Northwest. Finally, Town Hall is a member-supported organization, so I'd like to thank all of the members watching tonight. Now onto our authors. Casey Schwartz lives in New York City, where she grew up. A graduate of Brown University, she holds a master's degree in developmental neuroscience and psychoanalysis from the University College London. While she was in graduate school, she found the subject of her first book, In the Mind Fields, Exploring the New Science of Neuropsychoanalysis, a work of nonfiction about the culture clash between the old and the new ways of thinking about the mind and the brain. Her writing has appeared in the New York Times Magazine, Newsweek, Departures, and New York, among other publications. Her essay for the New York Times Magazine, Generation Adderall, is the jump-off point for her current book tackling the question of attention in an age of technological onslaught. Jessica Bennett is an editor-at-large covering gender and culture at the New York Times. She was appointed the Times' first gender editor in 2017 and has since contributed to the coverage of #MeToo and oversaw the launch of the Overlooked Obituaries Project. As a writer, Bennett has chronicled the political power of women over 60, the post-#MeToo evolution of Miss America, gone inside the newer, woker Playboy magazine, and has profiled E. Jean Carroll, Monica Lewinsky, Paula Broadwell, and Jennifer Aniston, among others. Her writing has appeared in Vogue, Elle, The Washington Post, Newsweek, and Time, among other outlets, and she is the author of Feminist Fight Club, a survival manual for a sexist workplace, as well as This is 18. Schwartz's book, Attention, A Love Story, is the subject of tonight's talk. Please join me in welcoming Casey Schwartz and Jessica Bennett.
Thanks, Candace.
Thank you so much, Candace. I just was remembering being in physical town hall for the last book and just feeling so nostalgic for that. And I hope I can get back there again soon.
And we love Elliott Bay Books, my hometown bookstore that I grew up with. So excited that we can support them through buying Casey's book. So hi, everyone. I'm thrilled to be with you and thrilled to be with my friend Casey. We're in New York, which is why our Zoom backgrounds are a little bit dim in the background. Casey, so you're in New York. You have a newborn baby. We are here to talk about attention. We are in isolation. You're trying to promote a new book. How is your attention? Let me just ask.
it seems like, and I wonder if people listening, if this will resonate too. I mean, everyone I've spoken to has said they cannot concentrate just to save their life at the moment. I mean, that never before has it been harder to focus, which is sort of ironic because we have this exalted sense of quarantine as this time to be so productive and write King Lear, or just sort of even organize a drawer seems beyond me right now.
Right.
I'm hearing this, I mean, from absolutely everyone. And it's, I mean, it makes sense because it's so, and when we're this sort of, when there's this much uncertainty and anxiety, and we're going into like a sort of a chronic stress situation, it actually becomes really hard to even remember what you care about and even keep it in the forefront of your thoughts, which is one of the things that if you're going to have sustained attention, you really need to have that kind of clear sense of what your goals are and what your priorities are. But it's this paradoxical moment because, we were talking earlier about the fact that obviously, thank God for our screens, thank God for our tech right now. We've never been more dependent on it. But at the same time, I feel like we've never been more aware of what it doesn't provide and what it doesn't accomplish. And the fact that it does not dispel the boredom and the sadness and the solitude of this moment. So we have this visceral sense of what our phones and our screens cannot do for us right now.
Well, you have this moment in the book where you cite a study that says we touch our phones 2,167 times a day. I was just reflecting on that today because I definitely am touching my phone twice as often, which means I need to disinfect it twice as often, which I am probably not doing. But that's wild. Like, that's madness.
All the studies like that are mind-boggling. The ones that said, in 2013. So, I mean, 7 years ago.
That's when that study was from?
No, that is more recent. But then there's one that says in 2013, millennials check their phones 150 times a day. And I can only imagine what that number is now.
So there is a real question of what this is doing to us as we all sit here scrolling endlessly and obsessively through Instagram.
This really interesting neuroscientist last week commented to me, "Oh, we're living out this. We're in an experiment. We're just living out an experiment right now, especially kids and screens.
Wow,
because screen time is just boundless."
So I want to take us back a bit. Tell me a bit about why you decided to write about attention and what led you down this path.
I was sort of thinking about, what do I care about? What upsets me enough that I could spend the next 3 or 4 years writing a book about it, right? Which I feel like is kind of a good way to pick a book topic. It's like, what makes you angry and depressed? And that's what you care about. That's what you care about. And I suddenly had this thought, like, we give away our attention so casually. And that's what upsets me so much about tech. I mean, I'm not a Luddite. I'm on Instagram like everybody else. But it's this idea that, we can sit for hours at a time in thrall to our tech without really feeling like we could even hope to take back our minds and hope to regain control. We become so passive. And it's the most nonchalant act, and we all do it every day. We just give away our attention like it's worthless. And that was the emotional prompt for starting this book. And I thought, like, this is worth digging into, thinking about the power of attention if we try to reclaim it. And, sort of just trying to push back a little bit against the onslaught of our personal tech.
So the subtitle of your book is A Love Story. So it's Attention, a Love Story. And it begins as a love story between you and a very powerful drug, Adderall.
Right. So obviously, like, I think my relationship with attention, my sort of wanting more attention, idolizing attention, thinking I don't have enough attention, this obviously goes back a long way for me. And when I got to college, when I was 18 years old, it was the year 2000, and a friend handed me a pill and said, this is Adderall, take it. I don't like it. It makes me want to do cartwheels in the hall all night. And this drug, Adderall, which treats ADHD, attention disorder, had only been on the market 4 years at that point. And I don't think I'd actually even heard of it. I barely knew what ADHD was. And this friend was giving it to me because I had an essay due the next day on a book I hadn't read yet. And I took this blue pill, and it was the key in the lock. It was like the sort of mythical silver bullet where you feel like, oh, this is the missing ingredient. And now that I have this magical pill, I can do anything. I can understand anything because I can focus on anything. That's what it started as. And that was the huge seduction of Adderall when I first encountered it at the age of 18. And it basically spent the next 10 years of my life on this so-called attention pill. And I say so-called because for me personally, this pill led me so far in the opposite direction of actually being able to pay true attention. And I just became so bogged down in the sort of the smallest little details in front of me, rather than seeing the full picture, the full forest. I was just bogged down in the trees until I was 30.
Wow.
Like all of those, I think that was a huge part of wanting to dig into the subject of attention, is that I'd had such a weird relationship with my own attention, thinking I need to take speed to pay attention, even though I also knew that I really didn't. This was all part of the psychology behind this book.
Fascinating. And so you really had to go back and excavate your past in some ways, looking at what led you to, maybe the audience probably doesn't know, you said until your 20s you were on Adderall. I won't give away your age, but you're a little bit older now. You're a little bit more mature. And you are no longer on it. And I think seeing it in a new way. What did the past teach you about the present?
That, attention, I think, like when on Adderall, I've had this idea that, attention has to be perfect. You know what I mean? You have to be sitting there for hours, penetrating a text or writing an article with barely looking up from the screen, barely looking up from the page. It's almost like this monastic, idealized vision of attention. And now I think, no, give me my glitchy attention. Give me my deeply human, deeply imperfect attention. Because even in that imperfect state, I can still understand more than I could understand while I was on speed. I still know how I feel about things, right? Which is what I sort of lost when I was taking this drug.
So in the book, you look back at all of these scholars who have actually studied attention in various forms over the years, and you do a really wonderful job of blending the past and the present. Talk to us a little bit about who some of these people were and what they were saying back then can inform us today when we think about focus, when we think about wanting to put our attention to a singular thing.
Right. Well, I mean, the classic, so I feel that whenever you encounter a discussion of attention, inevitably you'll bump into the philosopher and psychologist William James from the 19th century, who just wrote gorgeously about attention in the late years of the 19th century. And it was right, like attention hadn't been seen as like an interesting or worthwhile subject for scientists to study until his era, when it suddenly became very popular to try to probe it and understand. I mean, basic things, can we pay attention to more than one thing at once? Just how does attention work in the world? Can we split attention, or are we actually just toggling back and forth between stimuli? And he wrote so poetically about it, and he wrote about how attention is really how we build meaning into our lives and how we take charge of our life. It's what we agree to attend to. My experience is what I agree to attend to, he wrote. And he sort of, these classic, beautiful lines about attention that still ring so deeply today. But at the same time, he also has this line that was like, everyone knows what attention is. And then he goes on. But the thing is that they don't. And that was one of the fun things that I discovered while I was reporting, is that attention is still kind of mysterious. And, you know, if you ask certain scientists to say, like, what is there one definitive explanation for what attention is? No, there's not. And in fact, you know, there's even this expression like, oh, Jamesian confidence, to talk about how William James sort of overstated whether or not we have complete clarity about attention. So, you know, 130 years later, after William James, here we are still grappling with issues that he grappled with. He didn't have Instagram and Twitter, but he always talked about how incredibly hard it was to have sustained attention. And that it just took this incredible force of will and character to bring your attention back and back and back. And, you know, we're still grappling with exactly what William James grappled with in his own life. But I knew that I wanted this book to lean hard on the humanities and on writers, rather than having it be very science heavy, which was my last book. Then I thought, well, how am I ever going to pick sort of which writers to include in a book about attention? Because every writer cares about attention. And then I suddenly sort of, in the space of 1 week, realized, oh, there actually are these 3 writers who I think were almost sort of like uniquely obsessed by attention. David Foster Wallace, Aldous Huxley, and Simone Weil. And, you know, they all thought so much about attention in the sense of, like, David Foster Wallace, for example, talked about attention as a lifeline. And then if you could figure out what to pay attention to versus what to tune out, you could save your life. And, and not just that, but it went to such an ethical place for him, because it was also about how do we treat each other. You know, he gave this famous commencement speech in 2005 called "This is Water." And he was telling these graduating college kids at Kenyon, he's like painting this scenario for them. Like, they're going to get into their 20s. They're going to find themselves, you know, faced with the dreary humdrum reality of, you know, you go to the office, you're exhausted. Now you need to go to the grocery store for pick up dinner, and you're in the grocery store line, and you're just so full of contempt and frustration for everyone around you. And you imagine, you know, these things about the people around you, these very judgmental, harsh things. And he sort of says to these college kids, but if you sort of pay closer attention, it could be their whole story could be so vastly different than what you're assuming it is. And that paying attention is actually the gateway to having, like, compassion and forgiveness. And so these are the kinds of issues that come up when you're like researching or reporting on attention, is that it's really, it gets to the heart of something so much deeper than our relationship with our phone.
Right.
And it gets to human conduct and human relationships. And that's what was so seductive to me about this subject.
What is selective inattention?
Oh, selective inattention is this wonderful psychological term that I sort of drop in at the very end of the book, because it's this theory that, you know, for very sort of psychological reasons, we can't really afford to always pay attention to everything. Some things are too painful and too overwhelming. And that it just becomes sort of impossible to see everything around us no matter what. And we know this about the brain, that we can't possibly process everything in our environment. We'd be just sort of crippled. There'd be so much stimulation and so much information coming at us at all times.
So we just sort of tune things out that our brains need to tune out.
Yes, and then this sort of selective inattention goes farther because it's more about our personal psychology, like what we can bear and what we can't bear.
Is this why my husband can't focus on one thing, on more than one thing?
You think that's Sam?
Is that selective inattention?
You can blame selective inattention.
Perfect. Okay, so as I was reading the book, I remembered that a couple months back, I had texted you because I had just walked into a poll on the subway platform because I had been responding. I had been wrapped in an email responding so intensely on my way to work that I literally walked into a poll. And you were researching attention at the time. It was before the book came out. And I think I texted you and I was like, oh my God, I just walked into a poll. And of course, now we are in a moment when I long for the days when I can walk into a pool. And I don't even remember what my point is, but should we long for the days that we could have multiple things to focus on? Because it's interesting being in this moment of isolation where you simultaneously have these prolonged moments where you have nothing to do. And separately, there are people doing 17 things who are taking care of children and also doing their jobs. And I can't remember anything right now. So I guess where this is going is there a connection between memory and attention? Do you find yourself being very forgetful in this moment?
Completely. I mean, the classic thing is, what day is it, right?
Right.
But I mean, no, a very
Tuesday.
Oh, that's good. Actually, it was like, it's Wednesday, right? Neuroscience knows and has known for like, actually, I think a decade or two, that if you're distracted, you actually are not likely to remember well what's happening around you because you're not encoding it into your memory properly. So it's such a poignant sort of existential fact, which is that like when we go through our life in a state of distraction, that has such profound implications for our future, because we'll look back and it's sort of this, it's a hazier, less well preserved memory bank than we would have had otherwise. And I do wonder what we'll remember about this pandemic moment when we finally do come out of it. If we're all just sort of reactively staring at our screens all day and in a state of frazzled stress, distraction, I wonder if this whole period will seem like some kind of bad dream.
I don't know. I don't know the answer. But I want to remind people who are listening, you can ask questions. We're going to go to audience questions in a little bit. If you look at the bottom of your screen, right below the buy the book button, which you should also do, it says ask a question. Type your questions in there. We'll be going through audience questions shortly. So in the book, you start researching psychedelics. Right. And you eventually, because this is yet another way that people are trying to figure out what they care about and how to regain attention. And you end up going to this ayahuasca ceremony, but not actually taking the ayahuasca, full disclosure. But there's also this discussion of microdosing. Could you talk a little bit about drugs as they pertain to our attention? There has been some research about microdosing actually increasing attention, and like basically I want to know, should I start microdosing? And what should I microdose?
You could microdose anything at this point, I feel.
Okay.
But I was so drawn into the sort of the new psychedelic renaissance, the psychedelic science renaissance happening right now, with these incredible centers are opening all over the world at like King's College in England, Johns Hopkins at NYU, where they're looking at psychedelics in a way that they haven't really done since the 60s. And I was so intrigued by it because the sort of subtext of it is, we're not living our lives quite right. We're not living our lives quite optimally. And there's this, I wonder if psychedelics could sort of be the way forward. And I sort of had this theory that part of why people are drawn to psychedelics is that they want to change their own mental contents a little, their own consciousness a little. Partially because of the saturation of tech into our lives. And one of the things that's so popular in the world of psychedelics is taking microdose, which is this tiny, tiny dose of psychedelics where you don't hallucinate. You just feel this sort of subtle vibrancy, and you sort of just feel a little bit better, basically. And the Jim Fadiman, the researcher who started a lot of the new microdosing research protocols, told me that the number one reason people have been turning to microdosing is depression, but the number two reason is distraction. Because being on this tiny, tiny dose of like LSD or magic mushroom can kind of remove so much of the anxiety that is the reason we procrastinate. And people just like sort of face whatever they're meant to be doing sort of square on, and they don't have to sort of go into their own personal anxiety state about it, was his theory. That's the reason why microdosing seems to boost attention and focus.
What else did the researchers say about drugs as it pertains to attention? It's so interesting.
About psychedelics?
Yeah.
Too soon to know, but I mean, I think one of the, the reason I wound up with this ayahuasca retreat in the book was I was
tell us that.
I was following this fascinating doctor named Gabor Mate, who some of you may know about, who's an expert on addiction and attention, and works with ayahuasca a little bit. And we wound up together at this ayahuasca retreat. And he and I discussed it so much. And one of the theories about why people are seeking out psychedelics right now is that they're craving being back in the present moment, because our gadgets take us out of the present moment so profoundly and so repeatedly. And there's this huge desire within ourselves to sort of get away from that way of being and back to something that feels more in the here and now. Even though we don't really know how to do that, because we're so trapped in our technology.
It's so interesting because it's all this discussion of trying to be in the here and now. And I think in this moment, there seems to be this sort of popular refrain, and maybe it's just on the internet, or maybe it's just on Instagram and in certain micro communities. But this idea that this moment now, this pandemic, is about learning to be still. And I've heard that said in a few places, and it drives me nuts.
I've been driven crazy by this.
Okay, talk to me about this.
Have you been driven crazy by this?
Who's being still? It's like, do you have nothing to do? Do you not have it's like people are doing a million things. They are struggling in so many ways. People are worried for their jobs. People are on the front lines. People are essential workers. I don't think we're learning to be still.
And Sherry Turkle, the amazing Sherry Turkle.
I love Sherry Turkle,
who's written so much about our relationship to technology over the years. I was talking to her last week, and I was saying that this line, I hate this line. And she said, there's so many things happening politically that I don't want to be still for, was her point. That in other words, nothing about this moment in a certain way is conducive to that type of stillness, which also implies sort of a peacefulness and an acceptance. And I think, on the one hand, yes, we have to try to make peace with where we are right now. But on the other, no, we can't accept what's happening.
Mm-hmm.
for her, she's very, very politically minded. That's the lens through which I think she's most looking at this situation at the moment.
Sherry Turkle is at MIT. She studies. Just remind the audience what she studies.
Her wonderful books have been over the years about sort of how technology is distorting ourselves and our relationships. And her last book was Reclaiming Conversation, kind of about moving away from screens.
Do you have any advice? I know that journalists always get that, you spend years researching a book and talking to all of the experts, and then you go on your book tour and people just want to know your advice for the current moment. So that's what I'm going to do right now. What is your advice for people on how to regain some semblance of attention? I think a lot of people are really struggling right now, and I'm going to go to audience questions shortly. So if you have one, please ask, but would love your thoughts on what your prescriptive advice is.
I think it's important, actually. I mean, and this is also coming from a couple interviews I've done recently, but to limit news. One neuroscientist told me he has on his schedule 2 allotted half-an-hour sessions per day, one in the morning, but not first thing in the morning, and one in the late afternoon, where he can read the news. And outside of that, it's like he doesn't just sit on his screen refreshing the New York Times all day, right? He's doing the opposite of that. And that was interesting. I think exercise is crucial. And for me, I'm not a meditator, so I can't really offer that advice. But I think for me, the most profound thing about working on this book, researching this book, and writing this book has just been to know that our attention can have such a huge effect on the quality of our life. And that where you're putting your attention each and every day is ultimately where you're putting attention in your life. And never to lose sight of the fact that our attention, it seems like this throwaway sort of aspect of our own minds, but it's anything but, and it's so profound and powerful. And that's what I always try to stay awake to and stay conscious of.
That's interesting, and reminds me that I was going to ask you, after all of talking to these experts and researching, ultimately, how do you define attention?
I mean, I think the most common and in some sense, like most instructive metaphor for attention, it's sort of, I think it was first coined in the 80s, is like attention is like a spotlight. And, it's like what we sort of, it's what we pick out of the rushing stream of possible objects all around us in our environment at every moment of every day. We throw our spotlight of attention at it. But the truth is that it's happening all across the brain. It's not one discrete process. So I think I do. So I like to think of it in that term, as a spotlight.
I like that. It's funny you just said you didn't meditate, but there's a lot of questions about meditation.
Uh-oh.
Did you talk to any researchers about meditation and if that can be effective, or are there any other habits that some of the scholars that you spoke with have advised in terms of regaining it?
I did not really include meditation in this book because it's such a rich subject and it's been written about so well by so many other people that I just felt like I can't really step in without truly practicing it and sort of being expert at it.
That's interesting.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
You.
That's what happens on a digital interview. No, I was just going to say, you mentioned without participating in it, to what extent did you feel like, the first section of the book is so much about you and really delving into and understanding what you were going through as someone who is taking Adderall, but it's also so vigorously reported in the sense that you were talking to experts. Do you try to put yourself into the writing and the reporting process? What was your process like?
Well, I mean, as you know, it's not really a book about, like reining in screen time, or like
Right.
sort of, it's not a book about sort of, oh, let's put our phones in grayscale so that they're less appealing. It's more about how do we talk about attention? How do we seek to get it back? It's sort of looking at attention in our cultural moment from as many different angles as I thought I could kind of fit in there. Because attention, again, is one of these topics that, you know, you could choose any sort of angle to look at it from, because it sort of lends itself to that. But no, I never sort of did something where I like signed up for like a digital detox or something, because basically I don't really believe in that.
Oh,
Like
tell us more about that.
well, I mean, look at our lives, you know? I mean, the reality is our screens are here and we're moving into the future with them. And that's kind of an inevitability. But even within that framework, how do we reclaim some zone where we have agency, rather than we just sit there in an Instagram coma for 3 hours at a time? You know, like, how do we go forward with our phones while still feeling like we kind of control our own minds? And I think that's the question, rather than, oh, let me go to a silent meditation retreat for 2 weeks. And although that does sound really interesting and challenging, I just ultimately think, like, I'm not sure about these digital detox programs, because we have to learn to live with our technology.
Adderall is such a starting off point of this book and such a big part of it. And certainly, you know, to hear you talk about it, how it had just been put on the market a couple of years before, and it's so ubiquitous now, and so many people take it, and it seems so necessary in some ways. But how is your thinking about that drug changed?
I first wrote about being on Adderall in an article that ran in 2016. I am not kidding when I say that it's 4 years later and I still get emails about that article. I mean, I have gotten thousands and thousands of emails from people who had such a similar experience as I did, who wound up feeling that their lives were just stuck. And they were just on this drug and they have just lost themselves. And I've never felt a response like that, or like I had tapped a nerve like that. And I was always so struck that their stories were so much like my story. And so I think I have a new sense of exactly how widespread this problem really is with this drug, because this drug is so associated with all of our values, right? With ambition, with productivity, with success, with being good and paying attention and being that good A student, all the things that we care about and we sort of exalt. And so it lures you in. It's not a drug for like fuck ups or dropouts, right? It's a drug for people who want to do well. So I see it as enormously seductive and it's sort of a perfect drug for this American moment. But I also see that its damage is even more widespread than I had understood before I started writing about it.
When you say a perfect drug for this American moment, you know, so much of, I guess, a certain culture now is about achievement and pushing forward, and that incredible drive and hustle culture and all of these things that I think are being fueled by the internet and perhaps fundamentally changing now in this moment. But to what extent is that drive kind of overkill?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. And I think, you know, right now, I feel like, have you noticed that a lot of people are sort of asking questions about, well, they're feeling so out of sorts professionally, obviously, for obvious reasons. And they're sort of having to confront this idea of like, well, what is my worth outside of my productivity and outside of my professional accomplishments? And I think those are uncomfortable, painful questions that I'm noticing a lot of people bringing up during this pandemic. So I'm not sure, but I think Adderall sort of goes so hand in hand with a particular sort of value system. And that for me, it was just the opposite. It sort of took me even farther away from the things that I held dear.
That's so interesting. One of our viewers, Kathleen, says, I think so-called multitasking is the disease of this era. In fact, I consider it a euphemism for bad manners. What do you think?
Oh, that's so funny. Yeah, I mean, I wonder if Kathleen is referring to like someone who sits at the dinner table, like checking her text compulsively while Kathleen is trying to have a conversation with her. No, I mean, it's so interesting because a friend who is this neuroscientist at UCLA was telling me that he sees the research on multitasking as a little bit like the jury is still slightly out. It was long thought we lose when we multitask. We lose like sort of absorption and comprehension, but that actually there's newer research that obscures that. It's sort of making it a little bit less clear whether some people are able to multitask really well and can actually sort of do it well. But for a long time, the thought was, no, we're not made to multitask. Our brains don't work that way. Huh. And when we do, it just sort of cheapens each and everything we're hopping between.
Oh, that's so interesting.
But that's still the kind of subject that's being probed and studied now.
Do you consider yourself a multitasker? How's your phone at the dinner table etiquette?
Terrible. I'm terrible. And I hate when
that's good for your attention then, right?
I think so. I mean, I actually do really hate when I'm at a dinner table and there's like a phone on the table or like someone's on the phone. It like depresses me profoundly.
Do you think that was a personal attack on me?
Who are you asking?
No, I'll just, I am a person. It's horrible. I'm trying to get away from it. But it is interesting now, I think that we are starting to appreciate being able to like walk outside and feel the air on your face. Like there's this sort of beautiful thing about having to stay inside for so long that you do focus in a sense.
Totally. And how much we just miss the simple pleasure of being with our friends, of just like sitting and having a glass of wine in a restaurant with our friends. All right, what else do we have in the hopper?
Folks, if you have questions, send them in. We're going to do probably about 5 more minutes. And then Casey has a sleeping newborn baby to get to. Let's see. So, that's interesting. Ross says online schooling is asking children to attend to their education while we're all in a state of fight or flight.
Right.
Do you think consistency in asking kids to attend like they would at school is helpful or harmful right now?
No, I'd be so interested to hear from the parents of kids who are doing these online school all day. And I do wonder how it differs from one age to the next with these kids, and just how much they're able to tolerate being on screens. I don't really know the answer to that, Ross, but I'd love to hear more about parents' experience right now.
I mean, it seems like it's tough. And from a purely, if we're talking about multitasking, it's like multitasking your own work or looking for a job or whatever it is you may be doing, plus all the things that your kid needs to do with these really wild expectations.
Totally. Should we do one?
Sure, let's do one more. Okay, so this question has been here for a while and I kept looking at it, but wasn't sure if I understood it. So I'm just gonna ask and see if maybe you understand it. John asked how much of our focused attention and attention is ultimately about emotional regulation. I wasn't sure if I understood what emotional regulation meant, but I bet you do.
That's a great question. I believe it's a huge part of whether or not we're able to pay attention.
Wait, can you tell me and anyone else who doesn't know what emotional regulation means?
Right, it's about just like being able to kind of control your inner roiling emotional state, which is actually, so Daniel Goleman argues that our two sort of sources of distraction are inner and outer. You know, the outer world with all of its sort of interruptions, but the inner world with its terrible sort of emotional ups and downs, and the sort of the inner critic, and the sort of the scenes that we run through our head again and again and again, and sort of feel embarrassed or regretful or ashamed. Those are things that can so pull our focus out of the present moment and into replaying these scenarios and these ruminations. And, you know, one of the things that is so apparent about attention is how deeply emotional it is. I mean, and actually the doctor who I mentioned earlier, Gabor Mate, says that like distraction is kind of a coping mechanism, that, you know, kids in stressful environments learn to be distracted because it's so much, in a sense, easier than being in the present moment. They can keep themselves out of this stressful surrounding and sort of scatter themselves to the winds, and that those coping mechanisms can then turn into what's known as ADHD a little bit later on in their childhoods. Those behaviors are the core of that diagnosis, but they start as coping mechanisms, which I found kind of like a profound perspective on attention and distraction in childhood.
I'm glad I asked.
Yeah, thank you, John.
All right, we're going to have to wrap this up. Casey, the author of Attention, a Love Story. The book is available on your screen. It says buy the book. Thank you so much for joining us. And this has been fascinating. And we love speaking with the Seattle community and also anyone else tuning in from all over.
Great. Yeah, I just want to come back in and say thank you both so much for being here and talking to us about this. I think I don't even consider myself someone who has a problem with attention, but I found a lot of things that really resonated. I think it's maybe an evolving thing too that we're all kind of dealing with, particularly now. So thank you both so much. Very interesting talk. And thank you all for joining us, for watching. As Jessica said, please buy the book through Elliott Bay if you're interested. If you're interested in more town hall programming, there's a follow button at the top right hand of your screen. So follow us for upcoming programming. And again, if you are able, feel free to donate using the donate button on your screen. So thanks again. Thank you both, and everybody stay safe.
Thank you all. Bye.
Thank you.